afternoon to Dr. Hafiza and my classmates. My name is Nikiri and today I'm going to talk about Pride and Prejudice. So Pride and Prejudice is a novel written by Jane Austen in the 1813. So my presentation will start with the introduction to this novel. Nextly is the two major themes, which is Pride and Prejudice. Nextly is the characters, which has the characters of the themes, which is Pride and Prejudice. Nextly is a comparison of the how does Pride and Prejudice is act out with the current generation. Is it the same or different? Nextly is a comparison of the man and woman in the time of the novel and with the current generation. Lastly is my conclusion, and I'll close my presentation with my references. So introduction to Pride and Prejudice. So Pride and Prejudice is a love story of Elizabeth Bennet and Whitfield Darcy. So they both have to overcome their characters, which is Pride and Prejudice, as to be together. And Pride and Prejudice is mostly act out by them, which makes out the story the story of them shows us how they overcome it by changing their views towards their own selves and others. And nextly, this story is set in the world of reputation and expectation. So that as for reputation, which means that they hope their other half of themselves is at the highest status of the society, so that they can be respected and be seen well. And nextly is their expectation to their other half is that they hope that the other half is also has a higher status in the society, which that can help them to in other aspects as their businesses or their companies, like it can help them to begin their own family. So pride, so actually in the novel, the characters act out pride by the status of the person, which means that the person with the highest status shows their pride by boasting their worthiness, because usually pride is shown by people which is richer or has higher statuses. So as for the people which has their pride and higher status, they look down to people which is at a lower status of society, and they refuses to have contact with them because it makes them feel like people at lower status is a shame for them and they don't really bring benefits to them. So which means that back in the times, the people of high status, because of their pride, they usually don't make businesses with the lower status because they don't bring benefit to them. So next thing, as for prejudice, it usually means that judgment at the first sight, which means that they don't really know that people and they just believe their own thoughts of how they think of that person. By that, the judgment of them becomes a prejudice because they think that it won't change easily at the first time, but it needs time to change back to after they getting to know them more. They only know that the judgment on them is usually wrong because we don't really know that person well. So in the novel, in that setting plot of that time, which means that prejudice is actually very obvious because they tend to think that what they think is right than to have the opportunity to know that person before they have their own judgment on that. So who is prideful in the novel? So the character of Whitfield Darcy. He is prideful in the novel because he always boasts with his status and he looks down on the lower status family because he came from a wealthful family. And for the example of his pridefulness, which means that in the ball, he judges Elizabeth is pretty, but he thinks that she is not worthy to be danced with because of her lower status, which makes that she is not worthy for him because she is not from a rich family, which doesn't bring any benefits for him. So as the obstacles of him is that his pride makes him struggle with his feelings with Elizabeth, and her family status of lower status of her family makes him struggles more because he likes her, but he struggles that her status is not equal to him, which means that she is not worth with him because she is from a lower family. And who is prejudiced? Elizabeth Bennet is prejudiced in this novel because she judges everyone at the first sight, and she turns it, and her judgment turns into prejudice that she doesn't even believe how other person thinks of it, except from what she knows or she can see. So at the beginning in the ball, she sees that Darcy is rude because he judges her from that she is poor and she's not worthy to be danced with because she is not from a higher class status. But after she get times to know him more, she noticed that actually Darcy is a caring person, and her judgment to him is wrong because she thinks that Darcy actually is worthy to spend her whole life with. So the comparison to the current generation is that pride and prejudice actually reflected in our current generation, but it's in some person but not everyone. So examples for pride in our current generation is that people with that are richer or have more higher status, they tend to show off their their status by showing off their cars, for example, expensive cars like BMWs or Mercedes, or their luxury products such as bags like LV, Gucci, Coach, or their watches like Rolex or anything. So the pride in the current generation is more obvious because they like to show off their own wealthiness, and they usually don't look into the lower status people because they think that they don't show a standard with that. So for prejudice actually is sometimes like a norm. Like for example, in a company, that manager has prejudice on that person, which that he sees, like for one day, a worker came late to work, but the manager didn't really understand the reason. He thinks that he is lazy because he is late to work. But after turns out that everyone would assume that he is lazy because of the thinking of the manager, and the manager changes other views in him, which means that in the current generation, prejudice is influenced by a person, which that everyone will have prejudice to that person. So which means that it's harder for him to prove that he's not lazy and his reason. And sometimes they don't really believe his reason for why he's late to work. So the comparison of man and woman with the current generation is that men in the back in the time of Austen, they tend to search for beauty and charm in women because they want to show off that their other half is the perfect one, which that they search for the beauteous one, and the one that we had charm. And usually for their marriage is for them to have children and make them to feel good, like they are fulfilled and they are full in their life, which is they had children um to help them to figure their family or their businesses. So as for current generation, there is switching in roles between man and woman. So for now, man is not all men is now working to earn money to provide for the family. So some men they now work like as housewives, which they stay at home, and women work to earn income for supporting the families or spending like groceries, electric bills, or some payments on loans. So men become the provider in the family, which means that they provide their time for cooking, spending time for teaching their children, or fetching their children, or sending their children to tuitions or schools or some activities. That means they spend more time with their children and they have a closer relationship with their children, which means they can really understand how does woman feel, and how hard does woman try to provide to support the family. So as for women in the book back then, marriage is the only way for them to live their life, which is lower status, or to improve not her own life, but her family's life, because marriage between higher status is more likely because it can help them to improve their situation, and their family usually helps them to find a richer and more status, more higher status man in the society. And usually women back in the olden time is trained to be a perfect wife, which means that they learn how to be a housewife, how to cook well, how to help their husbands to care of their family, and how to bring their children like they are 100% perfect wife and can help their husband to less his burden, which means that he don't have to worry about his family. He just have to work and come back and provide some income for her to buy the spending for the family. So as for the current generation, so even though it's not fully happening yet, but women getting more equality in work, which means that they have almost the same benefits and same rights with men in workplace, which means that women get works position same sex men. Like it's not a parity that men come first. So women has the right to work for themselves. And marriage is not only the option in life anymore for women, which means that women can choose to not to get married, not to having children. They can enjoy their own single life, which in traveling. So they don't have to be tied into marriage, which means that marriage is not their only option after finish their high schools, universities, or a degrees or master's, which means that women can work, or they can become an influencer or they can start their own career, which means that they don't really have to rely on men anymore in this current generation, because our generation is hoping that men and women is equal in the world. So in my conclusion, the book Pride and Prejudice is reflecting in our current generation, and it's worth to read it because it shows how does men and women improves better to bring our generation to a better life and better society, which means that men and women is not only like marriage is not the last option only option of them, which means women also can change the world, can bring better can show better improvement in any aspects, like in technologies or even in laws or even in working. So they don't have to be like men and women is now like equal in our current generation. And in the story it teaches a lot of lessons of how to not break from changing their own um bad not bad like their own prideful and prejudice. So it helps shows us how we can learn from them to be not prideful and not be judgmental, which means that it teaches how us to interact more with people, how to make better connection with people, like trying to spend time in getting to know them more, or trying to put down your status, like not being so into your status, which means that we can try to get to know other people from other status, because we can learn a lot from them, because we are learning and communicating, and we can share our thoughts of how we think about things. And this book is also interesting for me because it's not really for me it's not really a love story. It's a challenge for a see for a coming couple to be together, as they have to face their obstacles, how to it bonds them more and then know each other more. So it's not basically a love story for me, it's like a lesson taught to me. I learned that actually people can there's no I learned that actually people, if we spend our time on knowing them more and try to understand more, actually can make up make it up in the end, because we understand and we know how to care about others in in their ways, in their thoughts. And if we stand in their view, actually we can think that actually it's hard for them for some decisions, like struggling in the status, like if our family doesn't really thinks that we are worth together, actually it's so hard for that person to try to overcome and try to ask their family to accept the other half, because actually family blessing is important in a relationship. And besides that, trying to show your best to others, even in society, your family or others, is also important because it helps us to gain more knowledges, gain more trust, and gain more knowledges from others because we know how to put down our pride and we try to learn something from others. So as for prejudice, actually I think that people tend to judge a person at the first sight because we don't really know them. And actually it's quite important for us to be not that judgmental and try to know others first before we have our own thinkings on them, because actually it's rude and it's not respectful because we just judge people at the first sight, which shows that actually it's not a good habit. So we should try to not be prejudiced to others, and we should try to learn without upright. So this is my presentation, and this is my references. So thank you for spending your time.